Federal Agent Amara Daniels stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, tracing the rope burns on her wrists. Tomorrow, she would testify against the officers who had tied her to that oak tree. The nation watched, unaware that what these racist cops had done would transform American policing forever. Before we dive into this shocking true story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories of justice prevailing against impossible odds. Now, let's discover how one woman's nightmare in the woods became America's wake-up call. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Amara Daniels' office at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., casting golden stripes across her meticulous desk. At 42, Deputy Director Daniels had earned her corner office in the FBI's Civil Rights Division through 20 years of unwavering dedication and an unmatched record of successful prosecutions. Her wall displayed not personal accolades but photographs of those whose cases she had resolved, faces of Americans who had found justice through her work. The intercom buzzed, interrupting her review of case files. "Deputy Director, the director would like to see you immediately." Amara gathered her tablet and straightened her tailored navy suit, wondering what urgent matter required her attention. Director Marcus Coleman rarely called impromptu meetings unless something significant had developed. As she walked through the corridors, junior agents nodded respectfully. Amara had become a legend within the Bureau, not just for being one of the highest-ranking black women in FBI history, but for her uncompromising pursuit of justice regardless of political pressure. Director Coleman stood as she entered, his usual formality softened by the gravity in his eyes. "Amara, please close the door." The leather chair creaked as she sat, noting the thick file folder centered on his desk, stamped with red classification markings. "We have a situation in Riverdale Springs, Georgia," Coleman began, sliding the folder toward her. 3 incidents in the past year, all involving black citizens who reported being detained by police without cause, taken to remote locations, and left tied to trees. Amara's jaw tightened as she scanned the reports. The victims all described similar experiences: false pretexts for stops, excessive force, racial slurs, and finally, the humiliation of being bound and abandoned in Whitehaven Forest. "The local authorities claim these are unfounded allegations," Coleman continued. "The victims were found with no evidence of who had left them there. Local investigations went nowhere." "And the Justice Department?" Amara asked, already suspecting the answer. "Political complications. The county has connections that have stalled any official inquiry." Coleman leaned forward. "This is where you come in. Your undercover experience makes you uniquely qualified. We need someone who can gather irrefutable evidence from the inside." Amara understood immediately. "You want me to become a potential victim." "I want you to expose what's happening before someone dies," Coleman corrected. "Your cover will be solid. Tanya Williams, freelance journalist researching small-town economic development. Just enough curiosity to attract attention, just enough isolation to make you vulnerable." Amara nodded, memories of her grandfather's civil rights work flooding back. He had marched with Dr. King, had borne the scars of police batons and fire hoses. Her career choice had been partly to honor his legacy, to fight the same battles with new weapons, law, evidence, and the power of federal prosecution. "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow. Technical Division has already prepared your equipment. Standard communications protocols, plus new recording technology embedded in what appears to be ordinary accessories. We can't risk traditional wires." At home that evening, Amara packed while explaining the assignment to her husband Nathan, a cardiovascular surgeon at Georgetown University Hospital. After 16 years of marriage, he had learned to mask his worry with supportive practicality. "How long this time?" he asked, handing her the weatherproof jacket she would need for Georgia's unpredictable spring weather. 2 weeks, possibly 3, she replied, zipping her suitcase. "Director Coleman wants this resolved quickly." Their daughter Zora appeared in the doorway, 17 and perceptive beyond her years. "Another undercover assignment?" she asked, arms crossed protectively across her chest. "Just short-term research," Amara assured her, embracing her daughter. "I'll be back before your debate tournament." Zora returned the hug fiercely. Be careful, Mom. I know what happens to black people who ask too many questions in small southern towns. Amara met her daughter's eyes, recognizing the awareness that had come too early, the understanding every black child eventually developed about America's unequal justice. That's why someone needs to ask those questions, she said softly. So someday, nobody has to worry when their mom goes to do her job. The following afternoon, Amara Daniels disappeared, and Tanya Williams arrived in Riverdale Springs, Georgia, population 27,000. She checked into the Pine View Motel on the town's main street, a strategic location offering visibility of the police station across the square. The rental cabin she had reserved, situated near Whitehaven Forest, wouldn't be available until tomorrow. Her first impression of Riverdale Springs revealed a town divided not just by the railroad tracks but by invisible boundaries of race and class. The eastern neighborhood showcased well-maintained Victorian homes and manicured lawns, while the western section, predominantly black, featured smaller houses with aging infrastructure and fewer municipal services. Tanya spent her first day establishing her cover, visiting the local newspaper office to request archives for her economic development article, introducing herself at the Chamber of Commerce, and dining alone at the town's central cafe. She felt the stares, noted the subtle shift in service when her accent didn't match their expectations of a black woman. You staying long in town, miss? The waitress asked, refilling her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. A few weeks, Tanya replied with a practiced smile. I'm researching how small towns are adapting to economic changes. Well, we don't change much around here, the woman responded, her tight smile not reaching her eyes. The following day, Tanya collected the keys to her rental cabin, a modest one-bedroom structure at the edge of Whitehaven Forest. The isolation served her mission perfectly, offering privacy for communications with her FBI team while placing her in the vicinity of the reported incidents. As she unpacked her equipment, disguised as ordinary items, she mentally reviewed her training. Her running routine would begin tomorrow, establishing a pattern that would make her both visible and predictable to local law enforcement. That evening, she drove to Sweet Grace Baptist Church, where community meetings were held every Thursday. Reverend Michael Thompson welcomed newcomers warmly, though his eyes held cautious assessment when Tanya introduced herself. After the meeting, as attendees enjoyed coffee and homemade desserts, he approached her again. Ms. Williams, what brings a journalist to our little corner of Georgia? Economic development seems an unusual focus given our town's stability. His emphasis on the last word carried layers of meaning. Sometimes stability itself tells a story, she replied. I'm interested in communities resistant to change, for better or worse. Reverend Thompson nodded slowly. If you're interested in resistance, you might want to speak with some of our congregation members. They have compelling perspectives on local institutions. As the church emptied, he introduced her to Calvin Washington, a 65-year-old deacon whose handshake was firm despite the slight tremor in his fingers. Ms. Williams here is a journalist, Reverend Thompson explained, asking questions about our town. Calvin's weathered face remained impassive. Some questions are dangerous in Riverdale Springs, especially when asked by folks who look like us. When Tanya returned to her cabin that night, she noticed the change immediately. Though nothing appeared missing, the subtle displacement of her belongings indicated someone had searched the space. More disturbing was her rental car. In the darkness of the gravel driveway, the hateful slur carved into the driver's door gleamed under her flashlight beam, the first unmistakable warning that her cover was working exactly as intended. The fluorescent lights of the Riverdale Springs Police Department break room hummed overhead as Officer Jason Mercer poured his third cup of coffee, black and bitter like his outlook on the morning's shift ahead. At 41, Mercer's once athletic build had thickened around the middle, his blonde hair thinning at the temples beneath his regulation cap. 16 years on the force had earned him seniority and a reputation that followed him like a shadow, though the 6 formal complaints filed against him had mysteriously disappeared from his personnel file under the previous chief's administration. His partner, Ryan Bellamy, leaned against the vending machine, scrolling through his phone with disinterest. At 36, Bellamy represented the next generation of Riverdale Springs policing, his 5 years on the force spent primarily under Mercer's tutelage. Tall and broad-shouldered with close-cropped brown hair, Bellamy had once dreamed of becoming a state trooper before settling for the stable paycheck and authority that came with the local badge. Heard Sullivan wants extra patrols in the West Side neighborhoods today, Bellamy mentioned, pocketing his phone. Something about suspicious activity reports. Mercer snorted, draining his coffee cup. Sullivan always wants extra patrols there. Keeping those people in line is practically department policy. He crushed the styrofoam cup in his fist. Let's roll. Their patrol car crawled through the streets of West Riverdale Springs, where modest homes with sagging porches lined potholed streets. The cruiser's presence caused immediate reactions. Children were called indoors, conversations halted, and eyes followed their slow progress with undisguised wariness. Mercer seemed to feed on this fear, occasionally blasting the siren just to watch residents jump. See that guy on the corner? Mercer nodded toward a young black man waiting at the bus stop. That's Marcus Jennings. Did 30 days last summer for resisting arrest. What Mercer didn't mention was that the resistance consisted of asking why he was being stopped in the first place. Should we have a word? Bellamy asked, already slowing the cruiser. Mercer grinned. Educational purposes only. The young man tensed as they approached, his hands instinctively becoming visible at his sides. Mr. Jennings, Mercer called, exiting the vehicle with one hand resting on his holster. Headed somewhere in a hurry? Just to work, Officer Mercer, Marcus replied, eyes fixed on a point past the policeman's shoulder. Bus comes at 8:15. Mind if we check that bag? It wasn't truly a question. Marcus silently handed over his backpack, which Mercer proceeded to empty onto the sidewalk. Work uniform, lunch container, paperback novel, all scattered across the concrete. Finding nothing of interest, Mercer carelessly kicked the items toward Marcus. Keep your nose clean, Jennings. We're watching you. As they returned to the cruiser, Bellamy glanced back at Marcus kneeling to collect his belongings as the bus arrived and departed without him. He'll be late now, he observed neutrally. Mercer shrugged. Should have caught an earlier bus. This pattern repeated throughout their shift, pretextual stops, unwarranted searches, and subtle intimidation, all targeted at black residents. A teenage girl on a bicycle was questioned about where she got such an expensive ride. A middle-aged woman was cited for a broken taillight that had been functioning perfectly. An elderly man watering his garden was warned about water restrictions that didn't actually exist. At noon, they parked behind Bill's diner for lunch, where the owner, Bill Harmon, greeted them with free coffee and discounted meals, the unspoken arrangement that ensured his business received special attention during evening patrols. Boys, Bill nodded, sliding 2 menus across the counter. Chief Sullivan called. Said he'd meet you here. Police Chief Gregory Sullivan arrived minutes later, his imposing frame filling the doorway before he spotted his officers and joined them. At 54, Sullivan had overseen the department for 8 years, maintaining what he called traditional policing values, in the face of national pushes for reform. Gentlemen, he greeted, settling his bulk into the booth. Anything interesting this morning? Same old, Mercer replied around a mouthful of cheeseburger. Though we did notice something you might find interesting. That journalist woman was poking around the community center, talking to Calvin Washington and his crowd. Sullivan's expression darkened. The one staying out by Whitehaven? Tanya something? Williams, Bellamy supplied. Says she's researching economic development. Nobody comes to Riverdale Springs to write about economics, Sullivan said flatly. Keep an eye on her. Find out what she's really after. After lunch, as they resumed patrol, Mercer guided the cruiser toward the eastern edge of town, eventually passing a small blue cabin set back from the road. Our journalist's friend's temporary home, he noted, slowing to a crawl. Convenient location, wouldn't you say? Right by the forest where those supposed incidents happened. Bellamy frowned. You think she's connected to those complaints? The ones Sullivan told us to forget about? Too much coincidence, Mercer replied. Out-of-town black woman, asking questions, staying right where those troublemakers claimed they were taken? He pulled the cruiser onto a side road that offered a view of the cabin while keeping them hidden among the trees. "Let's see what Ms. Williams does with her afternoon." They watched as Tanya emerged from the cabin wearing running clothes, checked her fitness watch, and began a stretching routine. "She's establishing a pattern," Mercer observed. "Jogging route probably takes her right into the forest." Bellamy shifted uncomfortably. "So what if it does? We can't stop someone for jogging." Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Can we? Whitehaven has those restricted conservation areas. Very easy to accidentally trespass there." Later that evening, Mercer returned home to his ranch-style house in the newer development on the north side of town. His wife Catherine had already fed their 2 sons and was helping the younger one with homework at the kitchen table. "Overtime again?" she asked without looking up, her tone suggesting this was a familiar conversation. "Sullivan wanted extra patrols," he answered, opening the refrigerator and retrieving a beer. Catherine finally glanced up, her expression unreadable. "There's a plate in the microwave." Mercer nodded and retreated to the living room, where he unmuted the television, already tuned to a 24-hour news channel where commentators debated police tactics in urban communities. He snorted at what he considered naive perspectives from people who had never worn the badge. His phone buzzed with a text from Bellamy. Journalist was asking questions at the grocery store. Clerk said she wanted to know about local police. Mercer typed back quickly, "Time to teach another lesson. Tomorrow during her run. Conservation area trespass." After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Usual spot. Bring the kit." In the bedroom later that night, as Catherine slept beside him, Mercer stared at the ceiling, mentally justifying tomorrow's plans. He wasn't a bad person, he told himself. He was protecting his town, his way of life. People like this Williams woman came to places like Riverdale Springs with their big city ideas, stirring up trouble, making good officers second-guess themselves. Sometimes they needed to be reminded that they weren't welcome. Sometimes examples had to be made. He thought briefly of the 3 others they had taught similar lessons to over the past year. None had filed official complaints afterward, too afraid or too smart to make waves. This journalist would be the same. A few hours in the forest, tied to a tree, would send the right message. She'd either leave town immediately or learn to mind her own business. Either way, the natural order of Riverdale Springs would be preserved. What Mercer couldn't know, as he finally drifted to sleep, was that this particular lesson was about to become the most consequential mistake of his life. Morning dew glistened on the forest floor as Amara began her 3rd day of jogging through Whitehaven Forest, her specialized FBI recording watch capturing her surroundings with each arm swing. The air carried the earthy scent of pine and wet soil, sunlight filtering through the dense canopy in dappled patterns that shifted with the gentle breeze. 4 miles into her route, she veered off the main trail, following coordinates from the case files of previous victims. According to their testimonies, the incidents had occurred deep within the eastern section of the forest, where the trees grew closer together and trails faded into undergrowth. Her tactical boots, disguised as ordinary running shoes, gripped the uneven terrain as she slowed her pace, eyes scanning for indicators. The spot, when she found it, was unremarkable to untrained eyes, a clearing with a large oak tree standing sentinel at its center. But Amara noted the disturbed ground around the base, the subtle marks on the bark approximately 6 feet up the trunk where restraints might have been secured. She activated the recording function on her watch with a double tap, documenting the location, while maintaining her cover as a jogger catching her breath. "Possible detention site located," she murmured into her fitness tracker, appearing to check her heart rate. Signs consistent with victim statements. Tree bark shows rope marks at restrained height. The distant sound of a vehicle engine broke the forest's tranquility. Amara immediately resumed her jogging stance, continuing along the path as if she had merely paused during her routine exercise. The engine grew louder, and through the trees she glimpsed a white and blue Riverdale Springs Police Department cruiser approaching on the service road that paralleled the jogging trail. She maintained her pace, outwardly unconcerned while mentally preparing for potential contact. The cruiser pulled alongside her, crawling at walking speed. The passenger window lowered, revealing Officer Jason Mercer's face, expression set in artificial pleasantness. "Morning, ma'am. Might want to be careful out here. You're approaching a protected conservation area." Amara slowed to a stop, controlling her breathing to appear appropriately winded from her run. "Oh, I didn't realize. There weren't any signs posted." Officer Ryan Bellamy emerged from the driver's side, circling the vehicle with deliberate slowness. "Signs are back at the main trailhead. You must have missed them." His hand rested casually on his holster, a posture Amara recognized as intentional intimidation. "I can turn around," she offered reasonably. "I'm still learning the area's boundaries." Mercer stepped from the vehicle, positioning himself to block her path back to the main trail. "You're that journalist staying out by the forest edge, right? Ms. Williams?" The casual use of her cover identity confirmed they had been monitoring her movements. "That's right. I'm researching economic development in rural communities." "Pretty far off the main roads for economic research," Bellamy commented, completing the flanking position that cut off her retreat options. "Seems like you're more interested in this section of forest than our town's economy." Amara recognized the escalation tactics, the manufactured pretense for confrontation. "I'm just getting some exercise before starting my interviews today," she explained, deliberately keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. "Is there a problem, officers? Need to see some ID?" Mercer demanded, his pleasant facade slipping. "We've had trespassing issues in this area." "Am I being detained?" Amara asked, knowing the question would provoke them while establishing important legal groundwork for the recording. "Because I don't believe jogging on a public trail requires identification." Mercer's expression hardened. "You questioning my authority, ma'am?" The emphasis on the last word carried unmistakable condescension. "I'm asking about my rights," Amara countered calmly. "If I'm not being detained, I'd like to continue my run." Bellamy stepped closer. "Actually, you are being detained. Suspected trespassing in a protected natural area is a criminal offense in this county." The fabricated charge was exactly what Amara had anticipated, matching the pattern described by previous victims. She could have ended the confrontation immediately by revealing her true identity, but doing so would sacrifice the opportunity to document their full behavior pattern. Instead, she made a strategic decision to maintain her cover. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," she stated firmly. "I don't believe I've committed any violation." Mercer's laugh held no humor. "That would be Chief Sullivan. Trust me, he'll see things our way." With practiced coordination, both officers moved simultaneously. Bellamy grabbed her arms while Mercer produced handcuffs. "Tanya Williams, you're under arrest for criminal trespass and resisting an officer's lawful commands." Amara offered no physical resistance, knowing that would only provide justification for escalated force. Instead, she clearly stated, "I am not resisting," while allowing them to secure the handcuffs, ensuring every word and action was captured by her recording devices. They marched her to the cruiser, Mercer's grip unnecessarily tight on her upper arm, his fingers digging into muscle with deliberate pain. As they reached the vehicle, Bellamy conducted a pat-down search that lingered inappropriately, his hands moving with unprofessional thoroughness across her body. "Where's your phone?" Mercer demanded, searching her running shorts and finding only a small key to her cabin. "I don't carry it when I run," she answered truthfully. The FBI had ensured no traceable electronics would be found, only their specialized recording equipment disguised as fitness accessories. "Check her wrists," Mercer instructed his partner. "These jogger types always have those fancy watches." Bellamy removed her recording watch, examining it with suspicion before pocketing it rather than logging it properly as evidence. They pushed her into the back seat of the cruiser, the cage separator between front and rear compartments preventing any movement. As Bellamy started the engine, Mercer turned to face her. "Seems like you've been asking a lot of questions around town, Ms. Williams. Questions about the police department. About incidents in this forest." His tone had shed all pretense of professionalism. "Outsiders coming here, stirring up trouble, making accusations." Amara remained silent, cataloging every word for the future prosecution, while maintaining the appearance of appropriate fear. The cruiser lurched forward, but instead of turning back toward town, it continued deeper into the forest on the narrow service road. After several minutes, Bellamy stopped the vehicle and cut the engine. "Looks like we've got something interesting here," Mercer announced, lifting a small notebook from the floor where it had apparently fallen from Amara's pocket during the arrest. It was a prop, carefully prepared by FBI analysts with just enough genuine research to support her cover identity, along with strategically placed notes about police misconduct allegations. "Been doing your homework on us, haven't you?" Mercer flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each note. Interviews with Calvin Washington, meeting schedules with community organizers, questions about forest incidents. He exchanged a meaningful look with Bellamy. "I think Ms. Williams needs a special introduction to Riverdale Springs hospitality. I can't help but wonder what's going through your mind right now. Are you feeling the tension building? Comment number 1 if you think Amara should reveal her true identity to protect herself, or number 2 if you believe she should maintain her cover to gather more evidence. Like this video if you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling, and subscribe to hear more stories of justice that too often go untold. Now, what do you think will happen next? Will these officers realize the gravity of their mistake before it's too late, or are they about to cross a line that can't be uncrossed? Let's continue this shocking true story and find out just how far these officers are willing to go. The police cruiser lurched forward on the uneven Forest Service road, branches scraping against the windows as Officer Bellamy navigated deeper into Whitehaven Forest. In the back seat, Amara focused on memorizing their route, mentally mapping each turn and landmark. Her FBI training had prepared her for situations like this, though she had never expected to experience the very crime she was investigating. 15 minutes of increasingly rough terrain passed before the vehicle finally stopped in a small clearing, invisible from the main trails and surrounded by dense undergrowth. Mercer exited first, circling to the trunk while Bellamy opened the rear door. "End of the line, Ms. Journalist," Bellamy announced, roughly pulling Amara from the back seat. The handcuffs bit into her wrists as she stumbled onto the forest floor, purposely appearing more disoriented than she actually was. Her trained eyes quickly assessed the clearing, identifying it as the same location she had been documenting earlier. The oak tree stood 30 feet away, its massive trunk scarred with faint markings from previous restraints. This confirmation sent a chill through her that required no acting, the reality of what these officers had done to others becoming viscerally clear. "What are you doing?" she demanded, injecting her voice with appropriate fear while ensuring her secondary recording device, disguised as a fitness band on her ankle, captured every word. "This isn't the police station." Mercer laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the quiet forest. "Special processing location for special guests," he replied, retrieving a black duffel bag from the cruiser's trunk. "Riverdale Springs has its own way of handling troublemakers who come asking the wrong questions." He approached, standing uncomfortably close. "People like you think you can come to our town, stir up the locals with talk about police misconduct, make our jobs harder." His breath smelled of coffee and mint as he leaned closer. "We protect this community. We keep the peace our way." "This is illegal detention," Amara stated clearly, knowing her words were being recorded. "You have no grounds to arrest me, and this is not an official police facility." Bellamy gripped her arm, steering her toward the oak tree. "Should have minded your own business, should have stayed in whatever liberal city you came from." His fingers dug into her flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "Folks around here respect authority. Time you learned that lesson." They positioned her with her back against the rough bark of the oak. Mercer produced a roll of thick rope from the duffel bag while Bellamy held her in place. "You can't do this," she protested, maintaining her cover identity's expected response while cataloging their actions for future prosecution. "People know where I am. They'll look for me." "Out here?" Mercer scoffed, unspooling the rope with practiced efficiency. "Nobody comes to this part of the forest. And your little friends in the West Side neighborhood won't be filing any missing persons reports. They know better." He began securing the rope around her torso, binding her to the tree with tight, professional knots that spoke of having performed this act before. The rough fibers scraped against her skin through the thin fabric of her running shirt. How many others? She asked, partly to keep them talking, partly to gather additional confessions. How many people have you brought here? Bellamy tensed visibly, but Mercer merely smiled. Enough to keep the peace, he answered vaguely. Some people need reminders about respecting the natural order of things. Once the rope was secured around her torso, pinning her to the tree, Mercer produced plastic zip ties from the duffel. He removed the handcuffs only to immediately bind her wrists together in front of her, then used a second zip tie to attach them to a rope loop at her waist. The professional thoroughness of their actions confirmed these officers had established a pattern, a system for their forest detentions. Smile for posterity, Mercer taunted, removing his department-issued phone and taking several photographs of Amara bound to the tree. The camera flash seemed harsh in the dappled forest light. These are just for our personal collection. Wouldn't want to forget our special guests. Bellamy shifted uncomfortably. We should head back. Sullivan will be looking for our report on the trespasser. His nervousness suggested he was the junior partner in these activities, following Mercer's lead rather than initiating. What, worried someone's going to come looking for her? Mercer mocked his partner. Nobody cares about another uppity journalist who doesn't know her place. He turned back to Amara, his expression darkening. Calvin Washington, Marcus Jennings, Darius Miller, they all learned their lesson after a few hours out here. Some reflection time on the consequences of challenging the wrong people in the wrong town. The casual mention of previous victims matched the names in the FBI case files, providing direct confirmation of their involvement. Amara memorized the confession while maintaining an appropriately distressed facade. You won't get away with this, she stated, needing to establish clear opposition for the record. This is kidnapping. Assault. Civil rights violations. Mercer leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Who's going to stop us? Your word against two respected officers. In Riverdale Springs? Chief Sullivan has been managing complaints for years. One phone call, and records disappear. Witnesses reconsider their statements. He straightened, addressing Bellamy. Check her for any other electronics. Bellamy methodically searched her, removing the secondary recording device from her ankle. Fancy fitness trackers, he commented, dropping it into the duffel bag alongside her watch. Probably worth a few $100s. Consider it a contribution to the police benevolent fund, Mercer joked darkly. Now, Ms. Williams, you have two choices. Spend a few educational hours contemplating your life choices, then leave Riverdale Springs never to return, or push this issue and discover just how unpleasant small-town justice can become. He glanced at his watch. We'll be back this evening. Maybe. If we remember. Bellamy had already started walking back to the cruiser, clearly eager to leave. Mercer followed, calling over his shoulder, enjoy communing with nature. I hear it's good for the soul. The cruiser's engine roared to life, and soon the sound faded as they departed, leaving Amara alone in the clearing. She waited 10 minutes, ensuring they were truly gone, before activating her emergency transmitter. Hidden in a small compartment within the heel of her tactical running shoe, the device had escaped their search. 3 quick pressure points with her toe against the tree root sent the preset distress signal with embedded GPS coordinates to her FBI backup team. Now came the hardest part, waiting. The restraints were professionally tied, genuinely restricting her movement without cutting off circulation. These officers had practice, confirming the pattern of abuses that had brought her to Riverdale Springs. The forest's earlier beauty now seemed threatening as shadows lengthened and birds called overhead. Alone against the tree, Amara thought of her husband Nathan and daughter Zora, of the risk she had accepted to expose this corruption, and of the previous victims who had endured this same humiliation without the comfort of knowing help was coming. Their faces from the case files flooded her memory, ordinary citizens whose only crime had been questioning authority, or being in the wrong place. Unlike them, she knew that within hours this tree would become not just a symbol of injustice but the centerpiece of evidence that would bring down a corrupt system that had terrorized an entire community. The forest's peaceful atmosphere transformed as hours passed, shadows elongating across the clearing as afternoon sunlight filtered through the dense canopy at increasingly oblique angles. Amara focused on controlled breathing, managing both her physical discomfort and mental state, while formulating her next steps. The ropes securing her to the oak tree were expertly tied, snug enough to prevent escape yet not tight enough to restrict blood flow, indicating the officer's experience with this form of detention. She tested the restraints methodically, identifying potential weak points while preserving her energy. Despite her extensive training, the physical reality of being bound for hours created genuine discomfort, shoulders aching from the unnatural position, legs growing numb from standing in place, thirst intensifying under the humid Georgia air. Birds called overhead, occasionally swooping low enough to inspect the unusual human presence in their territory. A family of squirrels chattered indignantly from nearby branches, their ordinary forest lives continuing undisturbed by the human drama below. As the third hour of her captivity approached, Amara's thoughts turned to previous victims who had endured this same ordeal without her advantages: specialized training, emergency transmitters, and the certainty of rescue. Calvin Washington, the church deacon, had been left here overnight according to his statement. Marcus Jennings, the young man Mercer had harassed at the bus stop, had spent 6 terrifying hours secured to this same tree. Darius Miller, a high school teacher who had filed a complaint about police harassment, had been abandoned here during a thunderstorm. None had received justice. Until now. The memory of her grandfather surfaced unbidden, his weathered hands pointing out faded scars from civil rights marches in the 60s. They tried to scare us away from the voting stations, he had told a young Amara. But fear only works when you believe you're powerless. He had faced fire hoses and police dogs without the protection of a badge or backup team. His courage had helped change laws, though not hearts and minds in places like Riverdale Springs, where the same hatred merely found new expressions, new uniforms. A distant rumble of thunder interrupted her thoughts, the spring weather shifting as dark clouds gathered overhead. The temperature dropped noticeably as the wind picked up, branches swaying with increasing vigor. If the approaching storm reached the forests before her rescue team, she would face additional challenges: hypothermia from rain-soaked clothes, reduced visibility hampering rescue efforts, possible flooding in the low-lying clearing. Amara renewed her efforts to loosen the restraints, working methodically against the rope fibers. Using techniques practiced in FBI extraction training, she positioned her bound hands to create maximum friction against one section of rope. Years of rock climbing had strengthened her fingers beyond what the officers might have anticipated, allowing her to gradually manipulate the knots. After 40 minutes of concentrated effort, she created a half-inch of slack, not enough for escape but sufficient to shift her position slightly and restore circulation to her numbing limbs. Meanwhile, in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., Nathan Daniels glanced at his watch for the third time in 15 minutes. Amara had missed their scheduled secure check-in, something that had never happened during previous undercover assignments. The protocols were clear: 3 missed communications constituted potential compromise. He dialed the emergency contact number provided by Director Coleman. "This is Dr. Daniels," he stated, medical training keeping his voice steady despite mounting concern. "My wife has missed 3 check-ins." The FBI response was immediate and comprehensive. Director Coleman personally called 5 minutes later. "Nathan, we're activating her emergency protocols now. The technical team is tracking her embedded transmitters." What he didn't share was that one of Amara's primary devices had gone silent, while a secondary emergency beacon had activated with distress coding, signaling a situation gone wrong. In the FBI command center established in Atlanta, Agent Marcus Tate assembled his rapid response team, 12 specialized agents with tactical training for extraction operations. Deputy Director Daniels' last known position was Whitehaven Forest outside Riverdale Springs. He briefed them, pointing to satellite imagery. "Emergency beacon activated 90 minutes ago, indicating she's stationary at these coordinates." He turned to the technical specialist. "Status on her recording devices?" "Primary watch transmitter went offline at approximately 10:45 this morning," the specialist reported. "Secondary ankle transmitter followed 20 minutes later." Only the emergency shoe beacon remains active, suggesting her equipment was discovered and confiscated. Tate nodded grimly. Consistent with the pattern she was investigating. Gear up for potential hostile extraction. Local law enforcement is considered compromised and possibly directly involved. The storm arrived before the rescue team, dark clouds releasing sheets of rain that penetrated even the forest canopy. Water streamed down Amara's face, plastering her clothes to her body as the temperature continued to drop. She focused on flexing muscle groups systematically to generate warmth, fighting the creeping numbness that threatened her extremities. Lightning flashed nearby, thunder following almost immediately, indicating the storm's center had reached Whitehaven Forest. The ancient oak provided minimal shelter as wind drove the rain horizontally, each gust feeling colder than the last. Time became fluid, minutes stretching interminably as Amara concentrated on survival rather than discomfort. Her FBI training included wilderness survival and resistance to environmental stress, knowledge she now employed to maintain core temperature and prevent shock. She recited mental protocols, focusing on controlled breathing and positive visualization to combat the physical reality of her situation. Another hour passed before the distinctive sound of vehicles penetrated the storm's cacophony. Amara tensed, unsure whether the approaching engines belonged to her rescue team or the returning officers. She prepared for either scenario, composing herself to maintain her cover identity if necessary. 3 black SUVs with darkened windows emerged from the Forest Service road, stopping at the clearing's edge. Figures in tactical gear deployed rapidly, establishing a perimeter before Agent Tate approached the oak tree, rain streaming from his protective gear. Deputy Director Daniels, he confirmed, immediately working to release her restraints. Medical team standing by. Are you injured? Equipment compromised, Officers Mercer and Bellamy directly implicated, she reported professionally, despite hours of captivity. Get documentation of everything before disturbing the scene. Even as they wrapped thermal blankets around her shoulders and led her toward the waiting vehicles, Amara directed the evidence collection, ensuring nothing would compromise the case she had sacrificed so much to build. The technical team photographed the tree, the restraints, and the surrounding area, collecting rope fibers and documenting foot impressions preserved in the muddy ground. Inside the lead SUV, a field medic examined her while she briefed Agent Tate. They've done this before, multiple victims, same location, same methodology. Chief Sullivan is implicated in covering up complaints. I have recorded confessions and direct evidence of civil rights violations. The medic reported elevated heart rate and mild hypothermia but no lasting physical damage. Amara accepted warm fluids and dry clothing but refused further medical attention. We need to move quickly before they realize who I am, she insisted. If they discover my true identity, they'll destroy evidence and coordinate their stories. Tate nodded. Director Coleman has authorized full operational control at your discretion. How do you want to proceed? Despite her ordeal, Amara's strategic mind remained sharp. Surveillance on all 3 officers, electronic and physical. Secure all department records before they can be altered. I want to complete this investigation personally. As the SUV convoy departed Whitehaven Forest, Amara contacted Nathan from a secure satellite phone. I'm safe, she assured him, voice steadier than she felt. Things went exactly as planned. His relief was palpable even through the secure connection. Zora and I were worried when we heard about the storm. I'll call again tomorrow, she promised. This isn't over yet. The SUVs bypassed Riverdale Springs entirely, heading instead to the FBI's temporary headquarters established in a neighboring county. There, Amara would transform her ordeal into the foundation of a case that would bring justice not just for herself, but for every victim who had been tied to that oak tree and then silenced by fear and institutional indifference. As medical personnel attended to her physical needs, her mind was already focused on the next phase, ensuring that Officers Mercer and Bellamy, along with Chief Sullivan, would face the full consequences of their actions under federal law. This was no longer just an investigation. It was personal. The sterile hospital room contrasted sharply with the forest where Amara had spent 5 hours bound to an oak tree. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as a doctor examined the rope burns on her wrists, his expression professionally neutral despite the obvious cause. These should heal without scarring, he noted, applying antibiotic ointment to the abraded skin. I recommend overnight observation for exposure and stress. Amara shook her head firmly. That's not possible. I need discharge papers immediately. When the doctor began to protest, she fixed him with a look that had made hardened criminals confess. This is a federal investigation. Every hour matters. 20 minutes later, she walked into the conference room of the temporary FBI command center established in a corporate office building 30 miles from Riverdale Springs. 4 large monitors displayed surveillance feeds, evidence logs, and case timelines. A dozen agents paused their activities as she entered, respect evident in their posture. Director Marcus Coleman rose from his seat at the head of the table, concern momentarily breaking through his professional demeanor. You should be resting, Amara. I'll rest when we have them in custody, she replied, accepting the tablet an aide offered. She scanned the preliminary reports with practiced efficiency. What's our surveillance status? Agent Tate highlighted a monitor showing live feeds. Full coverage on Mercer, Bellamy, and Sullivan. Home, vehicles, department, all under observation. They returned to the station after leaving you in the forest, filed a falsified report about a trespasser who fled the scene, then resumed normal patrol patterns. Coleman nodded. They have no idea who you really are. The technical team recovered your recording devices from Officer Bellamy's locker during shift change. They're extracting the data now. Amara scrolled through additional reports, the slight tremor in her hands the only indication of her recent ordeal. I want statements from all previous victims immediately. Use the evidence we've gathered to encourage full disclosure. She turned to the legal specialist. What are we looking at for charges? The attorney consulted her notes. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, civil rights violations under color of law, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Minimum 20 years federal time if we can prove pattern and practice. We can prove it, Amara stated with absolute certainty. I want forensics at that tree site working around the clock. Previous victims described being restrained in identical fashion. There will be fiber evidence, DNA transfer, foot impressions matching department-issued boots. Build me a timeline showing every documented incident. The command center transformed into a hive of coordinated activity. Evidence technicians processed the recovered recording devices, extracting high-definition audio that captured every incriminating word Mercer and Bellamy had uttered. Forensic teams worked in shifts at the forest site, using specialized lighting to reveal evidence invisible to the naked eye. Analysts constructed detailed profiles of the officers, mapping their patrol patterns against reported incidents of harassment and misconduct. Throughout the night, Amara reviewed evidence and directed operations despite medical recommendations for rest. The rope burns on her wrists served as constant reminders of what was at stake, not just her case, but justice for an entire community that had suffered under systematic oppression. At 7 the following morning, Director Coleman found her still working, surrounded by evidence files and digital displays. The technical team recovered everything, he reported, sliding a tablet across the table. Audio, video, GPS tracking. We have them cold. Amara reviewed the footage, watching her own detention from the perspective of her recording devices. Mercer's face filled the screen as he leaned close, unknowingly confessing directly into a federal recording. Calvin Washington, Marcus Jennings, Darius Miller, they all learned their lesson after a few hours out here. The explicit confession matched precisely with the victim statements they had gathered overnight. Perfect, she said, feeling vindication for every person who had endured similar treatment without the protection her federal status provided. What about Sullivan's involvement? Phone records show both officers called him immediately after leaving you in the forest. Cell tower data places all 3 at the station afterward for an unscheduled meeting. Coleman paused. We also found deleted records. 6 formal complaints against Mercer and Bellamy over the past 18 months, all involving similar allegations from black residents. All mysteriously removed from department servers. Amara nodded, the pattern confirming their suspicions of departmental conspiracy. I want surveillance expanded to include all electronic communications. The moment they realize I'm not just a journalist, they'll try to destroy evidence and coordinate their stories. As she spoke, a technician entered with an update. Ma'am, we've intercepted text messages between the officers. They're growing concerned about the journalist not being at her cabin. Mercer is suggesting they return to the forest site earlier than planned. They're getting nervous, Amara observed. Good. Let them sweat while we build our case. She turned to Coleman. I want Nathan and Zora moved to a secure location immediately. Once these officers realize who I am, they might lash out at my family. Coleman nodded. Already done. They're in a safe house with protective detail. The investigation accelerated throughout the day as more evidence accumulated. Forensic technicians discovered trace evidence at the oak tree linking it to all 3 previously identified victims, confirming the location had been used repeatedly for illegal detentions. Financial analysts uncovered suspicious deposits in Sullivan's accounts corresponding with complaint removals. A pattern emerged of systematic civil rights violations protected by departmental corruption. By late afternoon, the surveillance team reported increased activity at the police station. Sullivan has called an emergency meeting with all officers, Agent Tate reported. Closed door, no recordings permitted. Amara studied the live feed showing officers entering the conference room. They've realized something's wrong. We need to move faster. She turned to the operations team. I want every victim interview completed within 6 hours. Prepare for simultaneous arrest warrants for all 3 targets. As twilight approached, Amara finally accepted brief medical attention for her still-raw wrist abrasions. The doctor had just finished applying fresh bandages when her secure phone rang. Deputy Director, we have movement, Tate reported urgently. Mercer and Bellamy are heading back to the forest location. Sullivan is making calls to the county prosecutor and mayor. They're panicking, Amara observed. Mercer and Bellamy will try to eliminate evidence at the tree site. Sullivan is activating political connections for cover. She stood, refusing the doctor's protests. I'm leading the arrest team personally. Have tactical units in position at the forest edge in 20 minutes. Coleman intervened. Amara, you're too close to this. Let Tate handle the arrests. She met his gaze steadily. With respect, sir, I earn the right to look them in the eyes when they discover who I really am. Her tone left no room for debate. Those men left me tied to a tree because of the color of my skin. They've done it to others without consequence. I need to be there when justice finally catches up to them. 30 minutes later, Amara sat in the lead vehicle of an FBI tactical convoy, body armor beneath her jacket and her service weapon holstered at her side. Surveillance drones provided real-time footage of Mercer and Bellamy at the oak tree, frantically removing rope fragments and disturbing the ground around the site. They're destroying evidence, observed the tactical commander beside her. We should move now. Not yet, Amara countered, watching the feed with narrowed eyes. Let them incriminate themselves further. On screen, Bellamy appeared increasingly agitated, gesturing emphatically while Mercer attempted to calm him. Their body language told a story of partnership fracturing under pressure. Bellamy's the weak link, Amara noted. He followed Mercer's lead but lacks his conviction. She activated her radio. All units in position? Affirmative responses echoed through the channel. Execute on my mark. She watched the officers complete their evidence tampering, then returned to their vehicle with false confidence. 3, 2, 1, execute. The arrest operation unfolded with precision. Tactical teams blocked the Forest Service road from both directions, trapping the police cruiser between FBI vehicles. Spotlight beams cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating the shocked faces of Mercer and Bellamy as agents surrounded them with weapons drawn. Amara emerged from the lead vehicle last, badge displayed prominently as she approached the stunned officers. Officers Jason Mercer and Ryan Bellamy, she announced formally, satisfaction coursing through her as recognition dawned in their eyes. I'm Deputy Director Amara Daniels, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations under color of law. What would you do if you were in Amara's position right now? Comment number 1 if you would press for maximum charges against these officers, or number 2 if you believe rehabilitation and systemic change are more important than punishment. Hit that like button if you believe accountability in law enforcement is essential for true justice, and subscribe if you want to see more stories about courageous individuals who stand up against discrimination. Now, how do you think these officers will react when they realize the true identity of the woman they left tied to a tree? Will Bellamy turn against Mercer to save himself? And what about Chief Sullivan, who is still unaware his corrupt system is about to collapse? Let's continue this powerful story of justice and accountability. Dawn broke over Riverdale Springs as Amara reviewed surveillance footage from Chief Sullivan's home, where FBI agents had maintained an unbroken watch throughout the night. The police chief paced his living room, phone pressed to his ear as he made call after desperate call to political connections. His normally commanding presence had crumbled into panic when agents simultaneously arrested Mercer and Bellamy while serving search warrants on the police station. He knows his protection network is failing him, observed Agent Tate, standing beside Amara in the command center. County Commissioner, State Representative, District Judge, all refusing his calls since we briefed them on the investigation. Amara nodded, satisfaction warming her despite exhaustion from 36 sleepless hours. The evidence room team recovered the original complaint files Sullivan tried to destroy. 6 formal reports of similar forest detentions, all from black residents, all dismissed without investigation. The command center hummed with activity as dozens of agents processed evidence, constructed timeline displays, and prepared briefing materials for the Department of Justice. Director Coleman entered, nodding approval at the operation's progress. Washington is fully engaged. The Attorney General has assigned a special civil rights prosecution team. This case is priority 1. He studied Amara's face, noting the determination that overshadowed her fatigue. The technical team completed analysis of your recording devices. The audio quality is exceptional, captures everything from initial contact through abandonment in the forest. Mercer's explicit confession to previous incidents will be impossible to explain away. Amara turned to the evidence wall, where photographs of Calvin Washington, Marcus Jennings, and Darius Miller had been placed alongside her own image. What about the previous victims? Are they willing to testify? All 3 have provided detailed statements after seeing the evidence we recovered, Coleman confirmed. Washington and Miller have agreed to testify. Jennings is still hesitant, concerned about community repercussions. I'll speak with him personally, Amara decided. He needs to understand this isn't just about individual officers, but systemic accountability. She checked her watch. The processing team should have finished with Mercer and Bellamy by now. I want to conduct the initial interrogations myself. Coleman raised an eyebrow. You're too personally involved. Defense attorneys will claim bias. They'll claim bias regardless, Amara countered. A black federal agent targeting small-town officers? The narrative writes itself. But the evidence doesn't lie, and neither do my recordings. She gathered her materials. I need to look them in the eyes, Marcus. For every person they left tied to that tree who didn't have a badge to protect them. In the interrogation suite, Officer Ryan Bellamy sat alone at a metal table, his uniform replaced by standard-issue detention clothing. Without his badge and gun, he seemed smaller, younger, the confidence of authority stripped away. He flinched visibly when Amara entered the room. Officer Bellamy, she began formally, placing a recording device on the table. I'm Deputy Director Daniels. I believe we've met before, though I was using a different name at the time. She sat across from him, allowing silence to build pressure. Bellamy stared at the table, unable to meet her eyes. I want a lawyer, he finally mumbled. That's your right, Amara acknowledged. One has been contacted. Before they arrive, I thought you might want to know where things stand. She opened a folder, placing photographs on the table one by one. This is the oak tree in Whitehaven Forest. These rope fibers match those used to restrain me and 3 previous victims. These boot prints match your department-issued footwear. This soil sample contains DNA from 4 separate individuals, all left tied to the same tree over the past 18 months. Bellamy's breathing quickened as the evidence accumulated before him. Mercer said it was just intimidation, he whispered, defense crumbling. Just teaching troublemakers a lesson. Is that what you told yourself when you heard Calvin Washington's pleas for water after 8 hours in 90-degree heat? Amara asked, her voice steady despite the anger beneath. Or when Marcus Jennings begged you not to leave him in the forest overnight? Bellamy's head snapped up. I went back for Jennings. After midnight. Mercer didn't know. The unplanned confession hung in the air between them. We have your text messages, Officer Bellamy. Your concerns about going too far with Jennings, Mercer's responses threatening to report your weakness to Sullivan. Amara leaned forward. You knew it was wrong, yet you participated in my detention just the same. I didn't have a choice, he protested weakly. The department has a system. Sullivan protects Mercer. Mercer enforces Sullivan's vision of traditional policing. Anyone who questions it finds themselves without backup on dangerous calls. The textbook rationalization of corruption failed to move Amara. There's always a choice, Officer Bellamy. Calvin Washington didn't choose to be detained for asking questions about police presence at a community event. Marcus Jennings didn't choose to be abandoned in the forest for documenting harassment. I didn't choose to be tied to a tree for investigating civil rights violations. She gathered the photographs, returning them to her folder. Your lawyer will explain the federal sentencing guidelines for the charges you're facing. 20 years minimum, unless you cooperate fully regarding the department's practices and Chief Sullivan's involvement. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. Consider your choices carefully. You won't be the first officer to break ranks in the face of overwhelming evidence. In the adjacent interrogation room, Officer Jason Mercer projected defiance despite his circumstances. Unlike Bellamy, he sat straight-backed in his chair, eyes challenging when Amara entered. If it isn't the undercover Fed, he greeted with forced bravado. Nice performance in the forest. Very convincing fear. Amara placed her recording device on the table, mirroring her setup with Bellamy. Officer Jason Mercer, 16 years with Riverdale Springs Police Department. 6 complaints of excessive force, all mysteriously removed from your record. 3 confirmed incidents of illegal detention and civil rights violations. She maintained professional detachment despite the rope burns still visible on her wrists. Facing federal charges that carry minimum 20-year sentences. Mercer's smirk faltered slightly. You've got nothing but the word of a Fed against a decorated officer. This community stands behind its police. Does it? Amara activated the recording device, filling the room with Mercer's own voice. Calvin Washington, Marcus Jennings, Darius Miller, they all learned their lesson after a few hours out here. The color drained from his face as his confession played in high-definition clarity. Your department-issued phone contained photographs of all 3 victims tied to the same tree, Amara continued. Your home computer held additional images in encrypted files. The forensics team recovered deleted text messages between you and Chief Sullivan discussing how to handle troublemakers without paperwork. She placed a document before him. This is a search warrant for DNA samples to match against evidence recovered from the tree site. We already have confirmation linking you to all 4 incidents. Mercer's facade cracked further. Sullivan authorized everything. Department policy, his words. Community control measures. I was following established protocols. Interesting defense strategy, Amara noted clinically. Claiming you were following orders while implementing systematic civil rights violations. Historical precedent suggests that approach rarely succeeds in federal court. She gathered her materials. Your partner is providing a full statement in the next room. Chief Sullivan will be in custody within the hour. The question isn't whether you'll be convicted, Officer Mercer, but how many decades you'll serve. As she prepared to leave, Mercer's desperate voice stopped her. You don't understand how things work here. Some communities need firm handling. We maintained order. Amara turned back, allowing her professional mask to drop momentarily. What you maintained was terror. What you enforced was subordination based on race. What you've done is violate not just federal law but the foundational principles of equal protection. Her voice remained steady but carried the weight of personal experience. I understand exactly how things work here, Officer Mercer. That's why I was sent to end it. The arrest of Chief Gregory Sullivan unfolded with public spectacle an hour later. FBI agents entered the police station during morning briefing, reading charges before the assembled officers as local news cameras captured the moment. Sullivan's protests died on his lips when Amara entered last, federal badge displayed prominently. Recognition and understanding dawned in his eyes as he realized the full extent of the operation that had dismantled his department. Chief Gregory Sullivan, she announced formally, you are under arrest for conspiracy against rights, obstruction of justice, and deprivation of rights under color of law. As agents led the stunned police chief away in handcuffs, Amara addressed the remaining officers. This department will remain under federal oversight effective immediately. Any officer with knowledge of illegal detention practices has 24 hours to come forward voluntarily before facing potential conspiracy charges. Back at the command center, Amara finally allowed herself a moment's rest, the adrenaline of confrontation fading into bone-deep exhaustion. Director Coleman approached with a satellite phone. Someone wants to speak with you. Nathan's voice flowed through the secure line, a lifeline to normalcy. Zora and I saw the arrests on the news. Are you okay? The simple question nearly broke her professional composure. I will be, she answered truthfully. We got them, Nathan. All three, with evidence that can't be explained away or buried. We never doubted you would, he replied, pride evident even through the encrypted connection. When are you coming home? Amara glanced at the evidence room, where agents continued processing the accumulated record of years of systematic abuses. Soon, she promised. But this isn't finished yet. The case needs to be airtight, the prosecution flawless. What happened in Riverdale Springs isn't unique. We need to make this case a template for addressing similar patterns nationwide. After ending the call, she joined the prosecution planning session, where Department of Justice attorneys were mapping strategy for the cases against Mercer, Bellamy, and Sullivan. The evidence wall had expanded to include organizational charts of the department, timelines of incidents, and connections to other agencies that had enabled the corruption. Bellamy's attorney has contacted us about a potential cooperation agreement, the lead prosecutor reported. He's offering testimony against both Mercer and Sullivan in exchange for reduced charges. Full disclosure requirements, Amara stipulated. Every incident, every victim, every instance of departmental cover-up. No selective memory or minimized involvement. The prosecutor nodded, making notes. Sullivan remains defiant, claiming departmental autonomy and challenging federal jurisdiction. His attorney is floating potential political interference arguments. Let him, Amara responded confidently. The evidence speaks for itself. This isn't about politics, it's about constitutional violations systematically implemented by sworn officers. As night fell over Riverdale Springs, the command center received word that other officers had begun coming forward, providing statements about additional incidents and confirming the departmental culture that had protected abusive practices. What had begun as an investigation into isolated reports had uncovered a pattern of corruption that had terrorized the black community for years under the guise of legitimate policing. Amara stood at the window, watching lights blink on across the town as residents processed the day's shocking developments. For every person who had been tied to that oak tree, for every citizen who had lived in fear of those sworn to protect them, justice was finally approaching. The confrontation had been won, but the battle for lasting change was just beginning. The national media descended on Riverdale Springs like a hurricane, transforming the quiet town into the epicenter of America's ongoing reckoning with racial justice and policing. Satellite trucks crowded the town square, reporters delivered breathless updates against the backdrop of the police station, and hotel rooms filled with journalists from every major network. Amara watched the morning news coverage from the command center, where multiple screens displayed different channels simultaneously analyzing the same story. FBI Deputy Director uncovers systematic police abuse in Georgia town. The investigation that had begun with whispered complaints had exploded into headlines that commanded the nation's attention. "They're calling it the Daniels sting," noted Director Coleman, handing her a coffee. "The Attorney General has scheduled a press conference for noon. The White House will issue a statement afterward." Amara nodded, uncomfortable with the personal focus. "The story should be about the victims, not me. Washington, Jennings, Miller, and the others we've identified since the arrests. They endured this treatment without the protection of a badge. Your experience authenticated theirs," Coleman countered. "Before you, they were just allegations easily dismissed by the system. Now they're confirmed victims of documented crimes." He gestured toward another screen showing protesters gathering in cities across the country. "This case has become a flashpoint. People are demanding investigations into similar patterns nationwide." Beyond the command center, Riverdale Springs itself had transformed. The streets filled with protesters demanding accountability, community meetings overflowed with residents sharing long-suppressed stories of police intimidation, and church leaders organized prayer vigils for healing and justice. The western neighborhood, predominantly black, had erupted in celebrations when news broke of the arrests, years of fear giving way to cautious hope. Amara's secure phone chimed with a message from Nathan. "Zora's school is discussing your case in civics class today. She's so proud she can barely contain herself." "We both are. Love you?" The simple message centered her amid the whirlwind of activity. This was why she had endured being tied to that tree, why she had built her career around civil rights enforcement. Not for headlines or recognition, but for her daughter to grow up in a country where justice wasn't determined by race or power. The FBI presence in Riverdale Springs had expanded significantly since the arrests. Additional agents conducted interviews throughout the community, forensic teams processed evidence from multiple locations, and analysts constructed an organizational map of corruption that extended beyond the police department into county government. "We've identified 8 additional victims," reported Agent Tate during the morning briefing. "All black residents, all subjected to the forest detention treatment over the past 3 years. Pattern consistent with established timeline." The investigation had uncovered a progression of escalating abuses. What began as intimidation tactics under previous leadership had evolved into systematic civil rights violations under Sullivan's direction. County records show Sullivan implemented what he called community management protocols shortly after taking command, added the analyst. Department training materials referenced alternative correction methods without specific documentation. Amara studied the timeline display. And the county commissioners never questioned these practices? The mayor never investigated complaints? "That's where it gets interesting," Tate replied, highlighting connections on the organizational chart. Sullivan's brother-in-law sits on the county commission. The mayor's campaign received significant support from the police union. The system was designed to protect itself. The web of complicity explained how such blatant abuses had continued unchecked for years. As the briefing concluded, a junior agent approached with an update. "Ma'am, Officer Bellamy's formal cooperation agreement has been finalized. He's providing details on 27 separate incidents dating back 5 years." The scale of abuse continued to expand with each new disclosure. Amara decided it was time to meet with the community directly. That afternoon, she attended a town hall meeting at Sweet Grace Baptist Church, where Reverend Thompson had gathered residents to discuss the path forward. The historic church overflowed with people, extra chairs filling the aisles and latecomers standing against the walls. A hush fell over the congregation as Amara entered, recognition spreading through whispers and pointed fingers. Reverend Thompson welcomed her to the pulpit with dignified gratitude. "Deputy Director Daniels has done what many thought impossible," he told his congregation. "She has exposed the truth that our community has known but could not prove. Today, we honor her courage and discuss how healing begins." Amara approached the microphone, momentarily overwhelmed by the sea of faces watching her with complicated emotions: hope, gratitude, lingering fear, cautious optimism. "I came to Riverdale Springs because brave individuals like Calvin Washington and Marcus Jennings refused to remain silent," she began, her voice carrying through the church. "What happened to me happened to them first. but they lacked the protection of a federal badge. Their courage made this investigation possible. She outlined the investigation's findings without legal jargon, speaking plainly about the pattern of abuses and the corruption that had enabled it. This wasn't about a few bad officers, she explained. This was about a system designed to maintain control through fear and intimidation, targeting specific communities based on race. As she spoke, Calvin Washington stood from his seat in the front row. "For 8 hours, I was tied to that tree," he stated, his dignified voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "When I reported it, they threatened my family. Today is the first day in 3 years I've walked through town without looking over my shoulder." Others rose to share similar experiences, stories that had remained private out of fear now spoken aloud in a community ready to acknowledge hard truths. Darius Miller described losing his teaching position after reporting his detention. An elderly woman recounted her grandson's encounter with Mercer that had driven him from town. A teenage girl described witnessing her father's humiliation during a routine traffic stop. The catharsis of public testimony transformed the gathering from a simple meeting into a collective reckoning with years of suppressed trauma. When Amara returned to the command center that evening, the prosecution team awaited with updates. "Bellamy has confirmed Sullivan's direct orders regarding Forrest detentions," the lead attorney reported. "He's provided text messages, meeting notes, and specific instructions for targeting community troublemakers without formal arrests." "And Mercer?" Amara asked. "Still claiming departmental authorization while minimizing his own initiative," the attorney replied. "His attorney has approached about potential plea discussions, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. The photographs alone establish pattern and intent." "No reduced charges," Amara stated firmly. "He was the primary implementer. His actions were deliberate and repeated." The media coverage intensified as additional details emerged. Political figures issued statements condemning the abuses while carefully distancing themselves from the systemic failures that had enabled them. Civil rights organizations called for national legislation addressing similar patterns in other jurisdictions. Police departments across the country hastily announced reviews of their own detention practices. The following morning, Amara received notification that the Riverdale Springs City Council had voted unanimously to request federal oversight of the police department's reconstruction. The mayor, facing questions about his own knowledge of the abuses, had announced his resignation effective immediately. County commissioners scrambled to establish a civilian review board with actual enforcement authority. The ripple effects continued spreading outward from the small Georgia town. Nathan and Zora arrived that afternoon, their protective detail ensuring safe passage through the media encampment surrounding FBI headquarters. The family reunion occurred in a private conference room, where Amara embraced her daughter tightly, suddenly aware of how the case had changed not just Riverdale Springs but her own family's understanding of her work. "My teacher said you're making history, Mom," Zora declared, teenage self-consciousness momentarily eclipsed by pride. "They're talking about the Daniels Protocol for police accountability." "Is that true?" Amara asked Director Coleman when they resumed work later that day. "The Attorney General is proposing federal guidelines based on our investigation," he confirmed. "Standardized reporting requirements for detention practices, mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight with real authority. Your case is providing the template." Meanwhile, in the western neighborhoods of Riverdale Springs, something remarkable was happening. Residents who had avoided public spaces were reclaiming their community. Children played in parks previously considered too risky due to police harassment. Elderly residents sat on porches without fear of arbitrary questioning. Community meetings openly discussed issues previously considered too dangerous to mention. A painful history was being acknowledged, and in that acknowledgement lay the seeds of transformation. The prosecution team finalized its case preparation as additional evidence continued flowing in. Former officers provided testimony about departmental training that explicitly targeted black neighborhoods for enhanced scrutiny. County records revealed systematic dismissal of complaints filed by black residents. The case had expanded beyond individual officers to address the structural racism embedded in local governance. By week's end, national civil rights leaders had arrived in Riverdale Springs, transforming the small town into a symbolic battleground in America's ongoing struggle with its racial history. Protest marches filled the streets daily, some demanding justice for past abuses, others celebrating the first steps toward accountability. Faith leaders organized unity services bringing together previously segregated congregations. Business owners from different communities formed alliances to repair the town's damaged reputation. 7 days after the arrests, Amara conducted a final review of the prosecution materials, ensuring every detail was properly documented for trial. The evidence was overwhelming: testimony from multiple victims, forensic proof linking the officers to the forest site, electronic records confirming departmental knowledge, and Amara's own recorded experience providing irrefutable proof of their methods. Justice was approaching not just for her, but for every person who had been tied to that oak tree and then silenced by a system designed to protect itself rather than its citizens. As she prepared to return to Washington, Amara visited Whitehaven Forest one last time. The oak tree still stood in the clearing, now surrounded by yellow evidence markers and the fading imprints of intensive forensic work. This place of trauma would soon become a site of justice and ultimately, she hoped, healing. Standing before the ancient tree, she made a silent promise to every victim whose suffering had gone unacknowledged. Their voices would finally be heard, and the system that had failed them would be transformed by the truth they had bravely refused to surrender. The federal courthouse in Atlanta gleamed in the morning sunlight as Amara Daniels ascended the marble steps, flanked by prosecution team members and protected by a security detail. News cameras tracked her progress, capturing the determined set of her shoulders and the unwavering purpose in her stride. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom awaited, its hushed atmosphere charged with anticipation for her testimony. 3 months had passed since Officers Mercer and Bellamy had left her tied to an oak tree in Whitehaven Forest, unaware they were providing the final evidence needed to dismantle a corrupt system. In those months, 27 victims had come forward, the Riverdale Springs Police Department had been placed under federal receivership, and a national conversation about shadow detention practices had transformed policing protocols across the country. Today, Amara would testify not as an FBI deputy director but as a victim whose experience had catalyzed the movement. The courtroom rose as Judge Eleanor Harrington entered, her reputation for meticulous fairness making her the perfect jurist for this landmark case. The prosecution team had spent weeks presenting evidence against Mercer, Bellamy, and Sullivan, forensic reports linking them to multiple forest detentions, testimony from victims whose stories eerily mirrored Amara's, documentation of the department's systematic cover-up efforts. Today's testimony would provide the human reality behind the technical evidence. The government calls Deputy Director Amara Daniels, announced the lead prosecutor. As Amara took the oath, she noted the defendants' contrasting demeanors. Sullivan sat rigidly in apparent disbelief at his circumstances, Mercer maintained a facade of defiance despite mounting evidence, and Bellamy appeared physically diminished by guilt and the weight of his cooperation agreement. The prosecutor began methodically establishing the investigation's background. Deputy Director Daniels, please explain to the court why the FBI initiated an undercover operation in Riverdale Springs. We received multiple reports of a disturbing pattern, Amara testified, her clear voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. Black residents detained without cause, transported to remote locations in Whitehaven Forest, and left restrained for extended periods. Local complaints were systematically buried or dismissed. She detailed the careful preparation of her cover identity as journalist Tanya Williams, the technical equipment disguised as ordinary accessories, and the protocol for emergency extraction if necessary. Then came the heart of her testimony, a minute-by-minute account of her detention, abandonment, and rescue. Officer Mercer secured the primary restraints while Officer Bellamy held me against the tree, she recounted, her professional demeanor momentarily revealing the violation beneath. They explicitly referenced previous victims by name, confirming this was an established practice rather than an isolated incident. When the prosecution played the high-definition audio recordings captured by her devices, the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Mercer's voice filled the space, incriminating in its casual cruelty. Calvin Washington, Marcus Jennings, Darius Miller, they all learned their lesson after a few hours out here. Judge Harrington's expression remained impassive, but her pen moved rapidly across her notepad. The cross-examination by defense attorneys proved futile against Amara's meticulous testimony. Attempts to characterize the operation as entrapment collapsed when she outlined the substantial evidence gathered before her personal involvement. Suggestions of political motivation withered before the documented pattern of constitutional violations. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, even Sullivan's attorney appeared to recognize the inevitability of conviction. Outside the courthouse, Amara addressed waiting reporters with measured words. Today's testimony reflects not just my experience but the reality faced by citizens without the protection of a federal badge. This case is about ensuring equal justice regardless of position or power. The trial continued for another week, with testimony from previous victims providing emotional weight to the technical evidence. Calvin Washington described the psychological impact of his 8-hour ordeal tied to the oak tree. Marcus Jennings recounted the career opportunities lost after his detention made him miss a job interview. Darius Miller explained how his teaching position disappeared after he filed a complaint about his forest detention. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning unanimous guilty verdicts against all 3 defendants on all counts. 2 weeks later, they returned to Judge Harrington's courtroom for sentencing. The crowded gallery fell silent as the judge addressed the defendants directly. The evidence presented in this case reveals not merely individual misconduct but a systemic perversion of authority, she stated, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. When those entrusted with enforcing the law become its most egregious violators, the very foundation of justice is undermined. She sentenced Chief Sullivan to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Officer Mercer received 22 years for direct participation in multiple detentions and documented evidence of initiating the practice. Officer Bellamy, in recognition of his cooperation, received 8 years with the possibility of supervised release after 5. Let this sentence serve notice, Judge Harrington concluded, that no badge provides immunity from accountability when constitutional rights are violated. The Riverdale Springs case transformed from local scandal to national template with remarkable speed. Within 6 months, the Department of Justice had implemented the Daniels Protocol for investigating shadow detention practices nationwide. Police departments across the country faced mandatory reviews of detention procedures, civilian oversight requirements, and transparent complaint processes. The oak tree in Whitehaven Forest became both symbol and substance of a larger reckoning. 1 year after the verdicts, Amara returned to Riverdale Springs, not as an undercover operative but as the keynote speaker for the dedication of the Riverdale Springs Civil Rights Center. The facility, built with federal grants and community donations, would house training programs for law enforcement, legal resources for citizens, and educational exhibits documenting both the abuses and the transformation that followed. The town itself had changed visibly. The western neighborhoods displayed new infrastructure investments, businesses operated with integrated staffing, and the reconstructed police department reflected the community's diversity under new leadership. Most significantly, the invisible boundaries that had divided the town had begun to dissolve as residents collectively rebuilt their community's identity. What happened in Whitehaven Forest revealed our deepest failures, Amara told the gathered crowd, which included Calvin Washington, Marcus Jennings, and other former victims now serving on the Civilian Oversight Committee. But what happened afterward reveals our capacity for transformation when truth is finally acknowledged. She described the national impact of their collective courage. 27 police departments under federal investigation for similar practices, civil rights curriculum now mandatory in law enforcement training, and legislation pending to codify detention transparency requirements permanently into federal law. The lesson of Riverdale Springs isn't just about exposure of wrongdoing, she concluded. It's about what becomes possible when justice is truly equal and accountability knows no exceptions. After the ceremony, Amara visited the oak tree one final time. The Forest Service had installed a simple bronze plaque nearby, listing the names of every person who had been illegally detained there. The last line read simply, "Truth tied to this tree could not remain bound forever." Back in Washington, Amara's promotion to lead a new specialized civil rights enforcement division recognized her unique contribution to constitutional policing. The division would train agents specifically in identifying and investigating institutional patterns of rights violations, using the Riverdale Springs case as its foundational study. 6 months later, she stood before a class of new FBI recruits, her experience now formalized into training protocols that would shape the next generation of federal law enforcement. "The badge you will soon carry represents extraordinary power," she told them, conscious of how her own badge had both targeted and protected her in Whitehaven Forest. "That power exists not for its own sake but to protect the constitutional rights of every person, regardless of their position, influence, or background." A recruit raised her hand. "Deputy Director Daniels, how did you maintain your composure during those hours tied to the tree? Weren't you afraid?" Amara considered the question thoughtfully. "I was afraid," she acknowledged. "But I was also aware that my experience was temporary while others had endured the same treatment without the certainty of rescue or justice. Their courage became my strength." She glanced at the class of diverse faces before her, seeing in them the potential for a transformed understanding of justice. "Remember this fundamental truth: the measure of law enforcement isn't found in its power to control but in its commitment to protect equally. What happened in Riverdale Springs must never happen again, anywhere." As training concluded, Amara returned to her office where photographs now lined the wall: Calvin Washington receiving a Community Leadership Award, Marcus Jennings opening his own business, Darius Miller reinstated to his teaching position with full back pay. Alongside them hung a small, framed leaf from the oak tree, a reminder that justice, like nature itself, required both deep roots and the courage to grow toward the light. What do you think about Amara's story and the impact of her courage? Was justice truly served, or should the punishment have been even more severe for these officers who abused their power? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can ensure police accountability in our communities. If this story of courage and transformation moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more powerful narratives that shine light on important social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand why accountability in law enforcement matters to everyone. Thank you for listening to this true story of how one woman's determination transformed not just a town, but helped reshape our national conversation about justice and equality. This story reveals profound truths about justice and accountability in America. When power operates without oversight, it inevitably corrupts, creating systems where discrimination becomes policy and cruelty becomes procedure. The Riverdale Springs case demonstrates how racism often hides behind badges and policies, protected by networks of complicity that silence victims through fear and institutional pressure. True justice requires more than identifying individual bad apples, it demands examining the orchard that produced them. Amara's journey teaches us that change requires both institutional authority and personal courage. While her FBI credentials provided protection, it was her willingness to experience the same injustice faced by everyday citizens that created irrefutable evidence. The transformation that followed shows how transparency can heal communities divided by decades of mistrust. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that accountability is not punishment but restoration, a necessary step toward building systems where justice operates equally regardless of race or status. The ripple effects of one confrontation with truth can transform not just a department or town, but potentially an entire nation's approach to policing. When we stand witness to injustice, especially against those with less power and protection than ourselves, we become part of the solution rather than silent enablers of the problem. What moments of injustice have you witnessed where speaking up could have made a difference? Has there been a time when you stood up against discrimination, or wish you had? Comment below with your experiences or thoughts on how we can build more accountable systems in our own communities. If Amara's courage inspired you today, please hit that like button to help this important story reach more viewers. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that expose hidden injustices and celebrate those brave enough to confront them. Share this video with someone who needs to understand why racial equality in law enforcement isn't just a political issue but a human rights imperative. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in justice for all. Together, we can ensure that what happened in Riverdale Springs becomes a catalyst for change rather than just another untold story.